Welcome to the Books and Beer Book Club, coming to you from Cercis Brewing Company in Columbus, Wisconsin. We're a different kind of book club, only reading books by authors who can visit us in person or via Zoom for the discussion. We've been going strong since 2015, meeting nearly every month. We're now making these fun and informative discussions available to you on video. I'm your host, Valerie Beal. I'm an author myself, and I enjoy interviewing our guest authors and facilitating the questions from our readers both in person and on Zoom. We hope you enjoy this replay. To join us live, please check out our schedule on our Facebook page at Books and Beer Columbus.
So welcome, and I wish you felt better. We have a
Yeah, thank you.
request that you'll have to come visit us because people have the books that they want to have signed and stuff. So,
Oh yeah, for
so,
sure.
so
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun reading this, and all it made me think of is how did my parents actually let me go to UW Madison in 1986? Like,
Oh,
I feel like my
hmm
parents didn't pay very good attention to the news. I am the youngest of six. Maybe they just wanted to get rid of me. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah.
I dropped my
I
pen.
mean,
Sorry.
it's. Oh yeah.
So I mean, I was just surprised. I mean, I'm trying to think how old you are when you start paying attention to news, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and I remember some of these cases when I would have been like, say, a junior high student.
Okay.
Like, so that would have been in like the cases in the early 80s, late 70s and stuff. So why don't you
Oh,
give us your resume? Start with your
okay.
resume and tell us how you, I mean, we know you're a journalist, but I'm curious, like, because a lot of people have had a lot of different careers before they get into the, writing of a book. So tell us more, Kevin.
Yeah. So I've been a writer and a journalist, editor for over 20 years, I guess, going back to college, you might as well say. Well, I grew up on a small dairy farm up in Wapaka County, Wisconsin, and family farm, and just always had the writing bug, and then ended up going to UW Oshkosh and getting a journalism degree there, and yeah, just kind of threw myself into every opportunity I could in college. Worked for the campus paper, worked for the Oshkosh Northwestern internships. My passion really back then was sports. So I was a sports writer for a long time. And it kind of, I guess, still is really. In fact, like thinking about my next book, I'll probably do something in sports. We'll see. I mean, unless this true crime thing really takes off, I don't know. But yeah, I was a sports reporter for a long time, then kind of transitioned to news. Kind of when this was when like the 08, 09 recession hit. I'd gotten laid off a couple times and just
Yeah,
had a kind
that
of
happens in the news business.
yeah, yeah. And so then I kind of had some more news opportunities come along that I took up, and then yeah, transitioned more to news, and then that eventually brought me to Capital Newspapers, and I was a reporter out in Juneau County for a couple years, and then yeah, the opportunity to become the editor in Columbus came up. This was summer of 2017, and so yeah, I was editor there from the summer of 2017 until like like right before the pandemic hit. Well, I should say, I guess right when. I think I left in like early April of 2020
Yeah,
to take a
that
promotion.
was in the middle of the shutdown,
Yeah,
right? Or the
yeah,
beginning of the shutdown, I guess we would call it. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. And yeah, and so then after that I was a weeklies editor for a couple more years, and then just last summer of 22, I left the newspaper industry after a long time and took a job as a writer editor at the VA hospital in Madison. Um, I actually worked for a program called My Life, My Story, where we sit down and we interview veterans about their lives basically, and then we go back when we write up uh, after extensive editing, we write up about 1,000 word story, and it's in first person,
Mm.
the narrative, and it's pretty unique. Like it usually doesn't go out to like the masses unless they have to sign off on it for it to be published online or anything. But most of the time it goes into their patient record for their care team, doctors and nurses to read it. And they get copies too, as many as they want, pretty much, for their family. And so yeah, I've been doing that now since August of 22, and it's just, I mean, I've had some good jobs in newspapers, but this might be the best job I've had, and it's I just love it, and like I love hearing the stories, and um, y- yeah, just some of them are just amazing, and we're at the point now. Uh, mo- I'd say a good percentage of the vets we interview are from the Vietnam era, and they're getting a little more on in age, and various health problems and everything, and I gotta say I've always like loved American history and his history minor in college and everything, but it's it's amazing that how you kind of don't learn a lot about the wars that we didn't win in history class.
Yeah.
And I've learned more from these veterans about the Vietnam War. I mean, I wasn't around when it was going on yet, but I've learned more through these veterans, their stories, than I ever did in school, and just about how screwed up and crazy that war was and everything. And um, but dude, yeah, these stories are sometimes heartbreaking, and sometimes they'll break down and cry during the interviews, and some are lighthearted and funny, and so yeah, so that's what I'm doing now.
I think it sounds amazing. I think there's a lot of therapeutic value. We've had like was that last month, Kelsey? 2 months, 2 months ago? Yeah. So was I telling you about the book Tailspin? And that was a World War II story. And then when we get to November, one of our longtime members will be having his book about the Vietnam War.
Oh
And
wow.
so we this year in particular have done a lot of those types of stories. But how long has this program been happening at the VA? I'm just curious about it. It just sounds like a super program.
Yeah, well, we just passed our 10th anniversary.
Mhm.
So yeah, so it's yeah, been around 10 years, and it started in Madison, and then it kind of took a while to grow, I guess. Took a few years, but then we got like people out the Boston VA that really like caught wind of it. We had a doctor out there that was like, "Gosh, I think this could really help my patients and help me get to know my patients in the care." Because we're actually under the mental health umbrella there at the
That
VA.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because like you said, it's a lot of times therapeutic for them. So, and gosh, I think we've done like over 8,000 stories, and it's now spread to like 75 VA hospitals in the
But it started in
country.
Madison?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. That's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. Yep. Started right, right in Madison, and now we're at the point where we're getting, probably about a handful of hospitals outside of VA that have caught wind of it, and like, yeah, I think we could do this at our hospital. Um, Really, the lifeblood of the program is our volunteers. We have a lot of volunteer writers. A lot of them are retired journalists or authors or editors and stuff, and they do a great job, and we couldn't produce as many stories as we do without them. So, and we have people all over the country do it. So
I'm curious about on average. So to get 1,000 words of, about 1,000 word story or, mini memoir, what, how much time how much time does that take in interviews?
uh, we tell them usually it lasts about an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I usually record. I also take some like loose notes too.
Mhm.
I you know I don't like to. I mean, I know some writers don't hardly ever use a recorder and just like take notes, which is fine too. But I like to just have that backup plan, and then it's like I you kind of want to make it a conversation. I think
Right.
in the interview because it's so in depth, and um, and I always figure if you got your head buried in a notepad, it's kind of
Yeah.
hard to like converse with the veteran and everything too. But yeah, usually about an hour, sometimes less. Just sometimes more depending on how much they want to talk. I've had a few now that have gone over 2 hours, and now I had one gentleman. He's about 80 years old. I interviewed him about a month ago, and it was like 2 hours and 15 minutes, and then I, I could hardly get out the door. This was in the hospital because a lot of the interviews we do are right in their rooms, and and he's like, "Oh, if you come back tomorrow, I have more stories." And I was like, I think I got enough, and then when we go back to transcribe and everything, sometimes that can be a few thousand words at least. We usually don't, I usually don't put in every word they say because that would, take time. But overall, it takes. Sometimes it takes me a couple days just to process of the interviewing and writing and editing and stuff. So yeah.
Do you keep the raw files or give them their raw files, like their audio or the full transcription? I'm just curious.
Uh, no, I usually not. I mean, I guess if they asked for it, we probably could, but usually we just end up deleting it. I think too. The uh, VA has a lot of privacy laws and stuff too, and so we have to kind of be careful. There's like only a certain recorder that we can use. That's like a few
Oh,
hundred
I
bucks.
didn't even think about it that way. Yeah, it gets
Yeah, it's,
complicated, doesn't it? Yeah.
and so yeah, so yeah.
So then I'm curious. I don't know the beginning of your interest in these cold cases and how it came to be. And which one drew you in, or like what happened that you started to focus on these. I mean, you were clearly in this area. I mean, you were in Columbus, or you were within an hour or so of Madison for the
Yeah.
last few years, right? For most of your
Hmm.
career. So tell us about that. Like, how did this come to be? Um, and I guess, maybe your interest started, but like, when did you think that you might make a book out of it?
Yeah. It, I mean, I've always kind of been fascinated by unsolved mysteries and cold cases. I kind of wrote about that in the introduction. You going back to when I was a kid and watching the old unsolved mysteries, Robert Stack and everything, and kind of creeped me out a little bit as a 8, 9 year old kid and everything. But yeah, just and it's always fascinated me, and you know, I'm a fan of like ID and some of those networks that show a lot of it too, um, and then as a journalist back in I think 2017 or 16. I did a kind of a in-depth uh, front page cover story on it's like some local cold cases. So these were more like north of Madison, like Juneau County, Columbia County. Um, I think maybe Sauk County as well too, as kind of the area that we covered, and that seemed to go over well and everything. And
Are there quite a few in those counties too?
um, yeah, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say like a lot, but there's definitely ones out there that have been cold now for decades, going back to the 70s and 60s, and yeah, it's just and ones that it doesn't seem that there will be a resolution to them, um, but I can't remember how many exactly I covered in there, but uh yeah, just really perplexing ones too. And I mean there was one maybe some people have heard of the Barbara Blackstone murder that happened in Juneau County. That was in 87, I think. And I talked to some detectives on that, um uh and that's one that's really like perplexing and odd too, like what happened to her there. And but that kind of sparked my interest in doing it because the story did pretty well. Uh and then I thought, like, maybe I could pursue this as a book. And then I remember talking to you, Val, a few years back at a coffee shop in Columbus. I mentioned I think this idea, or and you said, oh, well, true crime's hot right now. So that kind of
We always get a good crowd for true crime. I don't know what's wrong with us, but I mean, there's usually
yeah.
the other books that we've had for true crime. I don't know. Maybe, there's more going on in Columbus than we, want to know about.
Yeah. Well, and I know in my that article that I wrote a few years back, I did reference the Marilyn McIntyre murder that happened in Columbus
Yeah.
back in yeah,
Yep.
back in 1980. And that
That
was
one got
kind of
solved though, didn't it? Did they finally figure
yeah,
it out? Yep.
yeah, and that's why I didn't go into it too much because it is solved, but it was a cold case for a long time. And I kind of got into the whole DNA aspect and how that kind of helped solve the case and everything there. But uh, yeah, it's yeah, when something like that happens in a small community, it just rocks the whole town and everything too. And um, so yeah.
Well, and I remember my mom talking about that one. I don't remember that one like as it happened, like remembering it. I would have been about that was 1980.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have been like 12. And so I kind of remember the ones like when I was like more pushing into high school a little bit more. But
Yeah.
I should remember that one. You would think I would because it was right here. You guys all remember that. Yeah. Oh, okay, so it was right in town here. Huh.
Hmm.
We did. They tore it down. I'm curious about the date range and the ones that you picked. And were there others outside of this date range that could have been included that, or you made a decision, or maybe these were just the only ones that kind of fit the same sort of profile?
Yeah, I guess originally going into it, I was gonna do like something like Wisconsin's most notorious cold cases or something like that, and almost have like just do like short profiles on maybe 25, 30 cases. But as I kind of dug into the research there, I was just thinking, man, I mean, this will take forever just going through it. I mean, just in like Milwaukee alone, there's so many and just a lot of missing person cases and everything. And so I look more. Well, let's focus on Madison, and uh, these just caught my eye because, uh, especially there's a few in the middle that happen pretty close together as
That's
far
right.
as late 70s, early 80s, and so that got me thinking. I mean, were they connected? Was there um, a serial killer roaming around Madison or southern Wisconsin? And then I kind of bookend them with the two that happened at UW Madison. The fact
Mm-hmm.
that they happened right on campus is pretty shocking to me too, and so that kind of piqued my interest. And I just, especially with the Rothschild case, uh, that one I was able to find like a lot of material, and I know it makes up a good chunk of the first half of the book, but that one was just had a lot of media attention,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think I kind of talked or wrote a little bit about that too, how um, the cases at UW got more media attention, and is that necessarily fair? I mean, is it because they were UW students? I mean, um, where the other young women weren't students. I think part of it was too it happened right on campus, and the bodies were found right there. With other cases, the women were abducted, and the bodies weren't found until months,
Right.
so months later. But so
Well,
yeah, it just yeah.
Well, and part of it is too, I think, for me as a UW Madison graduate, like I was thinking about these buildings and like the locations and how many times I walked home really late at night during finals week, like from the library, and you didn't really think about calling Women's Transit Authority because it was just a few blocks, and you just were dumb. I mean, there could have been people at that point, between when I was at school was 86 to 90. But I had
Yeah.
forgotten where University Hospital had been. Yeah, right. And so, like, I kept thinking, wow, she walked a long ways if she was having cigarette breaks with the people on break from University
The
Hospital.
hospital, yeah.
I had forgotten that it was right there on University Avenue, which shows, but I mean, there were a couple really specific people there, in particular the guy that had been stalking her. And
Yeah.
and then am I remembering right that then one of the two guys that had been, in the area, was that one of the possibilities, one of the two that keep coming up? The more notorious killers, was that actually a possibility for that 868 case for Rothschild?
Yeah. Um, are you talking about Henry Lucas and?
Yeah, I couldn't remember his name right away. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as far as I've found in the my research, he really doesn't come up for the Rothschild case because I actually
Too
think he was in
early.
prison in
Oh,
Texas at
okay.
the
Well,
time.
that's not going to work then, is
Yeah,
it?
yeah, no, but yeah, there. I mean, yeah. So that's kind of the difficult thing is uh, I know I called there was Niels Jorgensen, who was sort
Right.
of a main suspect in the Rothschild case, the guy that supposedly was stalking her. Um, and there was Zamastil, who was another possible suspect.
Was he the one
And it
that
was
was like
almost like,
16 at the time?
yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. And yeah, and it was interesting as I interviewed a detective that had worked on the Rothschild case when it was reopened a while back, and he worked for a cold case unit that had some funding and was basically kind of state run and would help out departments uh, and he gave me some good insight and quotes about uh, I mean he was pretty convinced that this Zamastil uh, was responsible for her murder because he felt like he just knew too much and he didn't think he got all his information from reading it in the newspapers and all that. And so it kind of makes you think. But then um, I ended up like kind of doing the math in my head to figure out how old he would have been, and I'm like, I mean, possible a 16-year-old kid could commit such a violent act
Sure.
like this. Sure, but and he did, he had mental health issues, and he was obviously, as I get into, in the book too, he was convicted of some other murders in California, Wisconsin, Illinois. Um, so it's definitely possible. You know, I guess my theory is I feel like it was more. I feel like it leans definitely more towards Jorgensen, and and I interviewed one of Christine's close friends, uh,
Is she the one
Linda
that wrote the
Schultz.
book?
Yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So I don't know. I have her someplace too, but um, yeah, she wrote a really nice book too, um, and this lady, I really feel for her because she's devoted the last 50 plus years into trying to prove that this guy did it, and you know I mean, almost borderline obsessive too, writing him letters and calling him. And yeah, he ended up passing away in 2013. But yeah, she's still very convinced that he's responsible.
Well,
But I,
I mean, if you think of the odds though, too, like if somebody has someone stalking them, what are the odds that if they do end up murdered like this, that they'd have both, they have another person who was also like that, they would cross paths with somebody else who was that deranged, that on top of
yeah,
the stalker, they also had somebody else. I mean, it just seems logical that it'd be the person who was stalking her. Um, but
yeah,
they could never get him to say enough in interviews,
yeah,
or he was too smart to give himself away.
yeah. I mean, yeah, he was a doctor. I mean, I mean, I don't know if you ever like, I mean, if he was a, I know he's a surgical resident, so I don't know if he ever really became a full-fledged doctor, but um, and supposedly he had like this huge ego, and I mean, definitely, I think he in his mind he felt like he could outsmart the police, and maybe he did to an extent too. But it is strange how supposedly he fled, soon after Christine was killed, and went out to Michigan for a while. He was with his uncle, and then ended up going out to New York, taking a position at a hospital in Brooklyn, and yeah, there were two detectives from Madison drove out there, and yeah, he agreed to be interviewed, and well, they actually, I backpedal a little bit. He was interviewed by some New York police and Madison police for a few hours, and then let go, and then they they wanted to interview him again and picked him up, and on their way to the police station over out there, he all of a sudden got sick, and I was actually able to interview one of the detectives who's still living, Richard Josephson. He's in his late 80s at this point, but um, and he couldn't provide me with too much. Just, I mean, it was 55 years ago, and he covered so many cases, but yeah, he said that it was like, it was one of those things where they just couldn't quite get that smoking gun. From he didn't confess to anything, and it's like, if he says he's sick and you haven't arrested him, he has a right to leave. So
Well, true. Yeah.
yeah, so
So
yeah,
I had never heard of that society of professionals that takes on the cold cases. Is
yeah,
it
Vidoc.
IDOC? I just had never heard of that. Had you guys heard of that? You have?
Yeah.
So you guys do more cold case reading. So do you watch any true crime or listen to any true crime podcasts?
Uh, yeah, once in a while, I know my wife really got into oh gosh, it's the one with Ashley Flowers and her friend. Uh, yeah, I'm blanking on the.
There's some nodding going on back here. So
Okay, yeah, I'm blanking on the name of that. That one's a really good one. We used to kind of listen together to that one a lot, but it, it was before our son was born, so that was our Sunday morning.
yeah, when you
Staying
had
in bed.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now it's not so much. It's he's almost two, and he's up by 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning. So, but yeah, that one was really good, and we've listened to some others here and there. So, yeah,
And I think too, I mean, clearly there is a lot of interest in this sort of thing because you've got like the different Netflix shows where everybody's playing armchair detective and second guessing everything that police have done. Or they should have done this, they should have done that. I did have a question though, like I'm very curious about the university campus murders. So you've got a lot of layers of professionals, right? So you've got your university police, and then you have city police, and then in some cases the FBI was brought in, right? Um,
yeah, yeah.
and then maybe in county
Dane
as well.
County.
So I mean,
Yeah,
you've
Dane
got
County.
a lot of professionals with different. I don't know. Did you ever see? I mean, was it good to have so many layers like that? From what like because you talk to a lot of people as you interview people. I mean, what did you see for some of these cases where there were so many jurisdictions in a way?
Yeah. I, well, kind of the whole reason they brought all three in was the Rothschild murder in '68 on campus there, and I think a lot of it had to do with probably just helping out UW police because I mean it hadn't been a murder on campus in 10 years, and just not something that shouldn't really ever happen on a university campus, but they were just not equipped to really take it on, I guess, and so they
That
brought in
would
the
be
city police, and Dane County, and they call it the Tri-County Task Force, I believe. Um, and I believe it was started with good intentions because they wanted, um, they wanted to solve the case, and they wanted all hands on deck and different detectives working on it, different points of view, and different criminal minds working on everything. Um, but then eventually, I felt like it kind of screwed things up because, and it was hard to really, the whole thing with like some of the evidence getting lost was hard to dive into too much because you know, these are still technically open cases, so
Yes. Yeah.
I
Right. Of
couldn't really,
course.
yeah, I couldn't actually like physically read the case files, unfortunately. Um, but what happened was UW, like say for the Rothschild case, like UW Madison had some of the evidence, and they sent it to uh, DC to get it forensic tested. And of course, back in '68, they didn't have nearly the scientific breakthroughs they have now. But that was good that they did that, at least. Um, but then supposedly some of the evidence went to like the Madison police, and then eventually some of it went to Dane County Sheriff's Department, and then there was this whole deal in the late '80s when they were moving. I think they were moving to the city county building in Madison, and somebody in Dane County Sheriff's Office said we need to get rid of this evidence. And so there's evidence in at least a few of these cases that were thrown away, and uh, that just boggles my mind because I don't think you should ever throw away evidence in an open case. I did get a little bit more insight into why when I interviewed Dave Mahoney. Uh,
Right.
and
He was the sheriff, right?
yeah, he was a sheriff of Dane
Yeah.
County for quite a few years, and I'd wanted to interview him for a while, and finally was able to pin him down this last winter here, and he was really really nice. Talked for over an hour, and but he basically said like a lot of the way evidence was stored back in the '70s and '80s was pretty crude, and it was before the digital revolution came in, and you could
Exactly. So
file
like,
stuff away.
yeah, no
Yeah,
barcodes, no like, yeah.
yeah, and he said too, sometimes they'd have evidence where if sometimes like a little water would get in, and it's sitting there for 20 years, and mold grows, and it's almost like ruins the evidence anyway.
Right.
That kind of made me realize maybe part of the rationale for why they threw away some of the evidence there too. But yeah, I think eventually it just, to going back to your original question, maybe just too many cooks in the kitchen there. I know the intentions were good, but I think eventually it just led to evidence being misplaced and thrown out. And now, unfortunately, I I don't know if any of these cases will be able to be solved unless someone comes forward, with new information, or we get a confession. Just because as far as DNA evidence goes, I really don't know unless I would actually go into the evidence room and check myself as far as what's really left for them to test to
Right.
possibly get DNA.
Well, and they'd have to have new like to test against to test it, but then they'd have to have something to try to like a suspect DNA to try to match it
Yeah,
up. Like so
yeah,
you were talking about the one case where they solved that way by getting the guy to lick the envelope,
yeah,
which
yep,
I thought was really wonderfully smart and like a good episode, right, of some crime show, right, where you're like, but it actually happened. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was I hope I'm saying the name right. Vanny Vanawayhoven. And he was a yeah, elderly gentleman up in Marinette County, and um, yeah, and just a guy that lived a normal country life for
yeah,
decades, and
looked like
good.
just a good neighbor kind of
Yeah,
dude. Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, they end up implicating him for the murder of this young couple in the mid '70s at a county park up in Marinette County, and Um, and yeah, just the reading some of those AP stories and newspaper clippings, like you could just hear the shock from the neighbors that like I couldn't believe it. It's just that, he would plow out our driveway and wave to you when you drove by and
And they're like, no
um
way, he's a nice guy. And
yeah, yeah. So that, but yeah, the way, I mean, the
well,
way
and
they
then
were able to, oh, go ahead.
say, and then I was going to say though, the way, am I remembering right that the way that they got to him is that they had, was it like a DNA, like one of those ancestry type tests? Yeah. Then they knew it had to be one of the offspring of these.
Yeah.
And so, like, those are tricky little tests, everybody. You better make sure all your relatives
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing though, like there's so many things that nobody say, working on the case in 1968 could have fast forwarded to 2020 or whatever to imagine what was available, in terms
Yeah.
of, DNA and like how much blood you used to have versus how much now. So it's, we can't really fault people for not being able to see the value, in some things that like they wouldn't know science would have come, so far, I guess,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of put that in the book there where I, I mean, still really doesn't excuse the fact that they threw away evidence, but I give them a little bit of a pass being that it was the late 80s and this technology wasn't available yet. So like you said, they don't have a crystal ball. They don't know what's coming down just
Right.
less than a decade yeah, into the future. So yeah, it's just some of those unfortunate things.
So at one point, I wasn't sure if it was your assertion or your gut instinct on this, or if it was you were reporting, writing someone else's that were there three of them that they were pretty sure were probably the same person, or like at one
Uh,
point, three, is it, or was it four? Three.
yeah, yeah, they're pretty sure that Henry Lee Lucas was a
Mm,
main suspect in a couple for sure. I know the Julie Hall case. I mean, he was heavily implicated in that. Um, Julie Spearschneider too, I believe. Yeah, I mean, even yeah, Deborah Bennett. Uh, I mean, almost all those cases in the middle, I think they consider him a suspect. I mean, Sula Mayhew and
because
um,
he had the
uh,
opportunity. He was in the area at the time.
yeah, yeah. He was, I guess, was kind of like a drifter, and he actually he had relatives up in like Superior, and he would drive through like Milwaukee, Madison, and go up and visit like relatives up there, and so he'd stop off and around Madison at around this time, uh, and his accomplice was Otis Toole, who was actually I, I think he ended up being convicted for the murder of John Walsh's son,
Right.
America's Most
Right.
Wanted. Yeah,
Which was an
host.
incredible case that we all remember, and we
Yeah,
will always remember that one, right? Yeah.
yeah. So and so the theory was that basically they would drive, up upper Midwest and pick up hitchhikers. And I go into that a little bit too, just how prevalent hitchhiking was in the 70s, and people
We
didn't
kind of
think twice. Yeah,
we kind of forget, right? Did any of you all hitchhike? You did? You did? Did you? So we have some hitchhikers in the group.
yeah, yeah.
And they
Well,
made it because they're here. Never alone. Never alone. Were you alone hitchhiking? So
yeah, yeah. Well, it is kind of interesting because I interviewed Marv Belosik for the book. He was a journalist for the State Journal for a long time and covered some of these cases. And he said, yeah, I used to do that sometimes back then too. And I mentioned to him how it seemed like there was a kind of a shift from the generation kind of just right before me, because I know by the time I was a kid, you'd hear about these stories of young kids getting abducted, and I mean, there's the case up in Minnesota. Jacob Weller, I think, is the name.
Is it
Um,
Wetterling? Wetterling.
yes, yeah,
I don't remember.
Wetterling, yeah.
Mhm.
Just awful, case there, and he was actually, yeah, he would be around my age, I believe, too. And
Mhm.
so, you start hearing in the news some of these cases, and I think maybe parents got a little bit more serious about telling their kids, hey, because I definitely, when I was growing up, was that you don't talk to strangers, you don't get
Yeah.
in people's cars, and so
There was a shift in the freedoms too, of just to, whatever. I mean, we used to bike all over the place here, and it was just like, be home by dinner. I mean, right? Isn't that how we were kind of? Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, parents don't do that anymore.
yeah,
They don't. So, and
yeah,
I wonder too, in a way too, you've got like the 24-hour. Oh,
yep,
Marianne says we were free range kids. We certainly were, Marianne. And
yeah,
look, we all turned out okay. Um, so it's an interesting thing though, how how much that's changed, and just certainly I would think that the way news media consumption has changed has put all
yeah,
these things in the forefront. Maybe like the 24-hour news cycle and things. We absorb so much more of the bad news than we used to.
yeah,
So I mean, we are maybe hyper focused on danger, but clearly it exists. So
yeah. Oh, excuse me.
no, they don't. They don't. No, they don't want to go out. So she's saying they don't want to go out and ride their bikes now. Everybody's on their phone or they're playing their games or whatever.
Hmm.
Or they're like texting somebody down the block instead of walking down the block. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's very true. Um, so I mean, it's just really fascinating. So you tried to reach out. You tried to reach out to the families, but you had a light touch with that, which I think makes sense. So
yeah,
you didn't really pursue it heavily. So you just tried maybe once to reach out, or how did you do that?
yeah. Like, so I ended up just doing research online to just to even find people, and I mean that was hard enough too, because I mean these aren't like famous people, by and large. So I think I went through like white pages or whatever, um, and I was able to find some addresses and some numbers, and I just I guess I didn't feel right, and I some journalists would probably just call the person, out of the blue, or like show up at their door pretty much too. And I don't know, maybe I just don't have the guts to do it or whatever. But I just felt like, what is I guess the best way to reach out without being like too pushy, or and so I ended up just sitting down and writing letters and trying to explain what I was doing, and that I'm not out to like sensationalize these cases, or I just want to learn more about them. I'm fascinated about them, and I actually hope that the book sheds more light on them and gets in the public eye, and
Mm.
maybe something will break in the cases. I mean, I who knows, but um, yeah. So most family members didn't get back to me. Uh, there was one I know. Donna Mraz's uh, brother. Well, I ended up his wife friended me on Facebook, and then I like recognized the name, and then I messaged her. I'm like, "Are you by any chance related to Mickey Mraz?" And she said yes. And then I said, would he have any interest in talking to me? And I guess he was thinking about it. His concern was like, am I exploiting his sister's murder for like book sales and
Right.
everything? And which I totally understood. I said that's not the case at all, but I understand. So I didn't end up talking to him. I ended up actually using an interview I found online that NBC 15 did about a decade ago with him. I used quite a bit of that and cited it, um, but there was a couple family members I talked to. Julie Spearschneider's sister, uh, Marcia, she emailed me and gave me a little bit of information. The LeMahieu family, I know one of their sisters I talked to a little bit just through Facebook and everything, but yeah, nobody actually face to face. I did have
It's
an
hard.
ex. Yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, they
yeah,
there's, I mean, there's no real resolution here for them. And,
yeah,
to talk through it again brings it all up again. Not that they've ever forgotten, so I can see the reticence.
yeah. That's it. That's pretty much exactly what Julie Spearschneider's sister told me through email um, that it just she's like, it takes me back to that day as a 16-year-old kid when they found her body, and her world came crashing down and everything too. And it just and then she really gave me some good quotes just in that email, just about how just to seeing it through a victim's family's eyes, and just like how whenever a young lady goes missing and it's in the news and she's at a grocery store and people know her and they think like, oh well, that's Julie Spearschneider's sister, and well, yeah, look what happened to her. And it's kind of the things that you don't even realize as a person that's never gone through something like this, that's what she has to deal with. So
Right. All the layers of it,
um,
you know. Um,
yeah,
so I had a thought too, specifically the ones like where like by the stadium where the guy was running away, like we have so many cameras now everywhere.
yeah,
And that, you can do the timestamp on these things and go, okay, wait, does this gas station at this corner, can we get that view? People have all the Ring doorbell things, which have
yeah,
been used to solve cases. um, I don't know if some of our technology has made it easier to solve cases or it's just made it easier for some people to get away with it. But I would
yeah,
think that the technology has made it like people to kind of don't realize when they're being, you know, seen on a camera, and that maybe they're, or I like the cases where they forget to take the person's like smartwatch off or their Fitbit. And so then they're like, I don't know, she ran off, but like her heart stopped at whatever time, because her Fitbit
yeah,
reporting or something. And you're like,
yeah,
oh yeah, this is probably someone should have thought about that if they wanted to get away with something. But
yeah. Yeah, it was just one of those things where back in 1982, yeah, they didn't have the camera setup they have now, and that was actually NBC 15 did a nice story on kind of intertwining, I guess, sort of an update on the Donna Mraz case, even though it was not nothing new really update, but just kind of intertwining that with the fact that UW police beefed up security after it happened, and that uh, put up more light poles, um and there's this whole push too after Donna was killed, that you don't walk alone at night, because it was just about midnight or close to it, and when it happened, and just walk with a buddy, and just get more streetwise, they were told, and so um yeah, and,
well, and it's just, I mean, and I think that people are maybe more aware of it. Just I don't know. I mean, I can't say I was smart. I mean, I really wasn't on campus smart. Um, our one of our daughters was out with her friends who then decided they wanted to go on to another bar, and it was chilling to read this. So she was gonna go home, so they split ways. But then a guy came out of the bar and said, "You need to know that someone has been watching you all night." And came out and walked her home. But then, of course, you wonder if that guy was no, it wasn't him. But like, right, for the most part, except possibly maybe the first murder, this was, they all felt very opportunistic, like wrong
yeah.
place, wrong time kind of people. Like you just crossing paths with somebody who was like a very, very bad person. Were there? Am I wrong about that? Were some of these actually possibly more, like people they knew?
with the Rothschild case, uh, I mean, if it was Jorgensen, then Christine would have known him somewhat because he supposedly was stalking her for months.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, but they don't think it was like a boyfriend or something like that. Supposedly she didn't have any real romantic interests or anything, but um, on the with a lot of the cases in between, Julie Hall and Spear Schneider and those, yeah, it almost seems like it was more random. Especially the Julie Hall case. She was out with one of her brothers and another friend, male friend, and the brother decided to go home. Yeah, they'd actually been, and some people there might remember this bar, the Maine King Tap, I believe it was called.
On Maine, the King Tap on Maine.
The king, yeah. Uh,
Is
and
it
supposedly this bar was kind of didn't
seedy?
have a very good reputation. That's why
I
yeah, I
mean,
don't,
pretty much wasn't King Street at one point like the prostitute street?
yeah, like the red light district of Madison, I
Like
guess.
but
Yeah.
right off of one block off the Capitol, right? That comes
Ye-
down. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was like the bad block, from what I remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, supposedly that was one of the bars they were at, and so who knows? Maybe somebody spotted her. Yep.
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 Mary Ann's agreeing with us. Yep, Maine and King. Maine and King.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe somebody spotted her there and was following her. But yeah, her brother had left, um, and then she was with this other guy, and he decided to leave, and she was like, "Oh, I'll be fine. I'll find a way home." And at some point, she must have spotted somebody she knew, or it could be because they, months later when they found her body and everything, they did the test results. They were able to find out that she had a large meal, like basically later into the night or early morning. So somebody must have ended up picking her up and taking her to a restaurant, having a meal,
Makes
and
sense. So
maybe
they need to
murdering
know,
her.
I mean, whoever that person was knows a heck of a lot.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Very
Yeah, but yeah, and then like the Shirley Stewart case, I wish I could have found more information on her case. So she was the youngest of the bunch. Of the victims,
was
just
she
17 years old.
yeah, was she the young mom? She was the young mom,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah,
That's so sad for
um,
her daughter.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, she was abducted uh, right outside Dean Clinic. She worked there as I think a nurse's aide or something, or maybe a housekeeper, I believe. And yeah, then they didn't find her body until, gosh, like a year and a half later. But um, that's definitely one where you can maybe consider Lucas as a suspect there. Who knows? I mean, that it's just tough with some of these cases. You can't find much information, and then when months and months and months go by, and uh, just due to decomposition, evidence gets deteriorated. And so, as I know, at first, I think with her case, they weren't even sure how she died. And I think they eventually were able to kind of piece it together. But yeah, that just makes it hard.
Right, because decomposition was so bad on her. Yeah, she was.
Yeah.
Was she the? Where was she found? Was she found near Lake Higansa, or am I mixing the cases up?
Uh, that's actually Julie Spearschneider was found
Okay, it was
down by
found near
there.
Lake
Yeah,
Higansa. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, Shirley Stewart, she was found uh just right like north of Lake Mendota. Um, is it the Governor Nelson State Park now, I
Oh
believe?
yeah, it was the surveyors, the ones that were actually going to create the boundaries
Yeah, it
around
wasn't
the park.
around yet. Yeah. And it's yeah, and I actually uh, maybe this is kind of morbid, but when I was like knee deep in the research of the book, I actually attempted. This was summer of last year to like drive around Dane County to sort of scope out where some of these bodies were found. And of course, 40 years, things changed as far as topography and everything too. But you just get a general idea. And in my mind, I could definitely see, especially in the Julia Hall and Shirley Stewart cases, where um, if you come and somewhat knew the area, and if you were the killer, it, their bodies weren't that far apart. Like, because Julia Hall's body was found just too close to Wanakee.
Oh yeah, that's
I
not
think
that
it was,
far then.
yeah, yeah. And I think that area is way different now, as it was like farmland back then, and
Oh yeah,
it's
when you think about the
pretty,
subdivisions out there now, yeah, compared
yeah,
to what
it's
was there. Yeah.
yeah. But so I ended up. I think I went to that site first, and I drove down to like the Governor Nelson Park, and it's just an easy drive down there. So it's like I could definitely see where if you were the same killer, where you'd kind of know the area, and the cases were only a couple years apart. Julie Hall was a couple years before Shirley's, so
Yeah, I
yeah,
know. It's very creepy.
yeah,
You're lucky you didn't draw the attention of like a Dane County deputy as you like went from spot to spot to spot
yeah, yeah,
searching.
yeah, yeah,
You'd be like, I swear I'm writing a book. I
yeah,
swear.
yeah, yeah. Research, yeah, yeah.
She's
Sorry.
asking whether anyone actually reached out to you without you reaching out to them when they found out maybe that you were writing this. Did you get some some surprise phone calls from anybody?
Uh, no, think I can't say I did. Uh, I did have after I wrote the letters to the family. So I wrote to one of the brothers of Julia Hall. I think she had 7 brothers. She was the only girl. Um, and uh, I got a kind of a surprise call from his ex girlfriend saying that, well, I really want to get back to you because unfortunately he just passed away like a couple weeks ago, and I'm going through
Oh
his stuff
God.
because I guess there was yeah I think they'd had a child together and they were still close and everything, and she said she's like, gosh, he would have definitely talked to you, would have loved to talk to you, but he didn't get the letter in time, and unfortunately I think she's had a few other brothers that have passed and a couple I weren't able to find, but that was kind of like out of the blue thing. I was excited to talk to her. At least I'm glad she got back to me, but I was just like,
Yeah,
you
too
know
late. Yeah.
yeah,
And she probably wasn't around at the time that this all happened to have
yeah,
any knowledge of it, from their perspective or whatever. So,
yeah, she didn't actually know Julie, just heard stories and everything too, but yeah.
aw. Well, I think too, like one of the last points you make, is that was it 1990 when they started to like do the combined DNA system, where then people were feeding all their information into a larger database, and people were able to connect the dots, for like these cross country type of murders, sprees, or
Yeah.
serial killers. So, I mean, I think this was a fascinating look at cases. A lot of things that I don't remember because I was too young, or that I kind of forgot, some of the details because it's in the news and then it's not,
Yeah.
and you kind of just, if you're not involved, you don't remember that those didn't get solved. So this is
Yeah.
fascinating. So any more true crime cases for you, do you think?
Yeah. Someone just asked me recently, like, if I'd ever do another true crime book. Possibly. I mean, this book was kind of challenging on a couple different levels. Like, for one, I wanted to get more interviews. And of course, it was difficult to get a hold of families, and I can understand why they wouldn't want to talk and all that. I had some detectives who were really helpful, and then I had I had one I won't mention the name, but retired Dane County detective that stood me up for interview, and I was like, yeah, yeah. So that was just kind of tough, and just just try to do the best research I could on what I could find, and then just writing about murder is just kind of depressing too, and it's kind of one thing I learned. It's like when you're watching a show or listening to podcasts or documentary about certain cases, like you can kind of detach yourself from it and you can be like fascinated and like it's like, ah, this is, this is horrible, or I'm glad they got the guy, or like I wish they could find this young lady, or this and that. And you when that's off and you kind of move on. But when you're working on a book for a couple years, like you immerse yourself in it, and like you know, I won't lie. I mean, I was like having like visions of these people at night and everything. Not really nightmares per se, but it when you dive into the research and you start writing, it kind of grabs a hold of you, And so that was kind of like a little bit creepy for me too. But I will say I wouldn't mind doing like a long form article for like a website or magazine. There is a case up north. I actually used to live up by Minocqua by the Lac de Flambeau uh, reservation there. This was back when I was a younger reporter about 15 years ago. And I would, whenever I'd go out to the reservation, go on Highway 47, I would pass this big billboard. And I'm not sure if anybody's heard of the Susan Poupart case, but there's this big billboard that said, she was abducted in 1990 and murdered. No one's ever been convicted of her crimes, and someone knows something. That's one that's always really that always fascinated me even back then, and that'd be one I'd like maybe love to dive into for like a long form article. I mean, it probably wouldn't be enough for a book, but um, yeah, that's one that and especially now we're starting to finally hear more about in the news where all these indigenous women are victims of sexual assault, abductions, murders, disappearances. It just,
Yeah. Did
I'm
you
glad
watch did you watch Alaska Daily?
I haven't yet, but
Oh, you need to
I
watch
need
it.
to.
Those are fascinating stories about how really little has been done in some of those cases.
Yeah,
It's a real tragedy that needs to be corrected. So,
yeah,
well,
yeah,
there's never any lack of bad bad people in the world, I guess, doing bad things. So,
yeah, yeah.
unfortunately.
Unfortunately,
Well, thank you for zooming in when you didn't feel good. You're
yeah.
you're very nice to do that. I hope your pneumonia goes away, your antibiotics kick its butt.
Thank
So
you. Yeah.
then come visit us when you're feeling better, and let us know like and then we'll make sure everybody brings their books to have you sign them. So
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me. And
thank you.
yeah, like I said, this is really a treat because when I was editor at the Columbus Journal, you'd always send along the press releases, and I'd get them then, and I always thought like, that would be cool to be the featured author someday.
Well, and then you would want to come, but I think our city council meetings Thursday nights, there was always something that you
Yeah,
got stuck covering on Thursday night. So
yeah,
I'm sorry about that, but at least you got to join us now. So,
yeah. Thank you so much.
all right. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Okay,
Yay.
bye.